My name is Stephanie. Danny was my older sister.
Hi, Mom.
Danny was 15 years old, the kind of older sister that every little sister looks up to.
Nice stuff.
Sorry.
Dad was sitting there, he's like, come on, let's try.
She was upset with my parents and needed some space to herself.
Bozeman, Montana, 1996. 15-year-old Danny Houshins had just gotten her driver's license. She had her first car, a Chevrolet pickup truck. She drove it proudly around town. Danny knew the forests around her home like the back of her hand, went camping with her parents, and climbed the local peaks. She was fearless and smart. She was an honor roll student. At school, she was known as a dedicated, hard-working student. One September day, Danny would drive out to the river for a walk. The girl would never return home alive from that trip, and her sister would have to fight for answers about Danny's death for a full 24 years. Bozeman, Montana, a small town tucked away in a valley once known as the Valley of Flowers. For centuries, this land was home to several Native American tribes, until European settlers arrived in the late 1800s. One of them was John Bozeman, the pioneer whose name the town still carries. Today, Bozeman is a quiet place with a population of about 50,000, surrounded by breathtaking mountain peaks, lush valleys, crystal-clear rivers, and endless forests. The town has always been deeply connected to the outdoors, hunting, fishing, hiking. For locals, spending time in nature isn't just a hobby, it's a way of life. Kids here grow up with that spirit of adventure from the very beginning. That was exactly the case for the Hutchins family. On November 11th, 1980, Cheryl and Rex Hutchins welcomed their daughter, Danielle Edeline, Danny for short. The couple had 3 children, Danny, her younger sister Stephanie, and their brother Jake. By 1996, Danny was 15 years old and Stephanie was 12. The 2 sisters were inseparable. Stephanie looked up to Danny in everything. She saw her older sister as her role model. And Danny truly had a bright spirit. She was funny, outgoing, and loved by everyone around her. She was passionate about science, did well in school, and had a natural curiosity about the world. At the same time, she wasn't afraid to laugh at herself, a quality that made her even more likable. Like many kids in Montana, Danny grew up skiing, hiking, rafting, and riding horses with her family. The outdoors wasn't just a backdrop to her life, it was at the center of it. In 1996, Danny reached a milestone she was especially proud of. At just 15 years old, she earned her driver's license. Back then in Montana, teens could legally drive at that age. For Danny, getting behind the wheel of her own pickup truck meant freedom and independence, and she embraced it wholeheartedly. September 21st was a Saturday. There was an argument in the Houchins family that day. It's a common thing in a family with a teenage girl. To unwind after the conflict, Danny went for a walk in the mountains by car. Cheryl, the mother, gave her her wristwatch so that the girl could keep track of the time. They should have guests in the evening. She needs to be home on time. Danielle just wanted some space, a little time away from home, away from her parents. Her mom and dad weren't worried about her. She knew the town inside and out. She knew the woods. The mountain trails were as familiar to her as her own backyard. She understood not to trust strangers. At 15, she wasn't a little kid anymore. In their minds, she was safe. Besides, Montana in those days was peaceful. Crime just wasn't something that happened here. Life moved at a slow, predictable pace. You could even call it boring. The sun was setting, and Danielle still wasn't home. Her worried parents headed out at dusk to search for their daughter. They knew she'd gone to walk near Cameron Bridge, where thick forest lines the riverbank. That's where they found her pickup truck. The vehicle was unlocked, completely out of character for responsible Danielle. Not only were her personal belongings inside, but her father's laptop as well. Why would she leave without securing the truck? On the trail beside the car, her parents discovered Danielle's keys and water bottle scattered on the ground. Cheryl's stomach dropped. She knew instinctively that something was terribly wrong. Fighting to stay calm, Cheryl left a note on the windshield. If Danielle came back, she should wait in the parking area. They'd return for her soon. Her parents contacted the sheriff's office, and deputies quickly responded to the pickup's location. Volunteers joined the effort, combing through the woods with flashlights, calling Danielle's name into the darkness. By 5 p.m., visibility had become nearly impossible. The official search was postponed until morning, but several volunteers refused to quit, continuing to sweep the forest along the river and beyond. That's when two brothers helping with the search made the devastating discovery. Danielle's body lay just 60 meters from her truck. I was about to tell my brother, "Let's head home. What are we even doing out here?" Then I heard him say, "I found her." I walked over and looked closer. It was her. I could see the back of her head. My stomach turned. I knew she was dead. Danielle appeared tangled in the underbrush, still wearing the blue jeans and gray sweater she'd left home in. One shoe remained on her foot. The other lay nearby. She was face down in a muddy puddle, one arm extended, the watch her mother had given her twisted around her wrist. We stayed there about 45 minutes. When I realized it was her, I got scared, one volunteer later recalled. Stephanie still remembers how her parents learned of her sister's death. She and her mother were home, anxiously waiting for news, when her father decided to return to the river one more time. As he stepped out of his truck, one of the brothers approached him with the news that Danielle had been found. When he returned home, he told Cheryl simply that Danielle was gone. Cheryl misunderstood, replying that she hoped the search would resume at first light and everything would be okay. They'd find her then. But Rex stopped her. "She's already been found. She's gone." Friends and neighbors wondered, had a killer come to Bozeman? One of Danielle's close friends was Rochelle Shrewd, who knew both Houchin's sisters well. She struggled to find words for her shock. "You never expect something like this to happen to one of your friends," she said. On September 25th, 400 people gathered at the local church to say goodbye to Danielle. Before the funeral, an autopsy was performed, concluding that she had died from drowning. How it happened, however, remained unclear. The report noted water and mud in her airways as if she had suffocated. But Danielle was definitely a capable swimmer, and she wasn't found in the river. She was discovered in a shallow, muddy puddle on the riverbank. Police told the grief-stricken family that Danielle had most likely died in an accident. She slipped, fell face first into the mud, and drowned. Her family didn't buy it. Everyone knew Danielle was an experienced outdoorswoman with strong survival skills. Even her family doctor, who knew her well, told police she had no medical conditions that would cause her to suddenly lose consciousness and be unable to lift herself out of shallow mud. And again, this wasn't the deep part of the river. She was found on the shore in inches of water. The family was left alone with their questions and suspicions, alone with their grief. Danielle was laid to rest, and her family tried to come to terms with what police called a freak accident. But Stephanie couldn't accept it. She refused to believe her sister had simply slipped and died. 24 years passed. Danielle Houshins became a cold case. Then, in recent years, a new detective arrived in town, Matt Boxmeyer. By then, none of the old-timers remained in the police department. The sheriff's office had completely turned over. While reviewing old files, Boxmeyer pulled Danielle's case. After scanning the medical examiner's report, Boxmeyer was horrified. This couldn't have been a simple drowning. Danielle hadn't just died accidentally. This girl had been murdered. It turned out the original autopsy had found bruising on her neck, toward the back near the base of her skull, as if someone had forcibly held her head underwater. There were scratches on her scalp, suggesting she'd fought back against whoever was holding her from behind. But that wasn't all. There was evidence of sexual assault, which meant male DNA. They'd also found several male hairs in her underwear, and mud wasn't just in her airways, it was in her lungs and even her stomach. Later, Boxmeyer would discover that this DNA had been tested years ago with no matches found. Worse, that testing had consumed most of the sample, leaving the new generation of investigators with barely anything to work with. That's when I learned Danielle didn't just drown in water, Stephanie remembered. Someone held her head down in the mud. There was mud in her lungs and stomach. She had bruising on the back of her head. Someone forcibly held her head underwater. She fought back. She clawed at them. Stephanie was furious. She began demanding a new investigation into her sister's death. Thanks to her persistence, the cause of death was finally changed to homicide. Now, investigators needed to analyze the DNA and figure out what happened that day and who Danielle had encountered by the river. Stephanie also accused the former sheriff of hiding the truth from her family. She was convinced they'd been lied to. Yes, police sometimes withhold certain facts from families to protect an investigation. Relatives might discuss case details at a coffee shop. Someone could overhear, and word might get back to the actual perpetrator, but why hide such crucial evidence? Why not reveal that DNA had been found, that she'd been sexually assaulted, that this was definitely a murder? In 2021, Danielle's case got serious attention. The new sheriff, Dan Springer, was the complete opposite of his 1990s predecessor. He also believed the original investigation had been badly bungled. It was time to make things right. A retired detective named Tom Elfman joined the effort. Tom had moved to Montana after years serving in the military and working for the LAPD, where he'd investigated brutal homicides. He was elderly and had just settled into retirement, enjoying the quiet life. But when he heard about Danielle's case being reopened, he couldn't stay on the sidelines. He walked into the Bozeman Sheriff's office and told his colleagues he was ready to come back to work. Tom wasn't interested in a peaceful retirement. He quickly connected with Stephanie, promising he'd find the killer no matter what it took. And Stephanie believed him. Tom took personal control of analyzing the DNA evidence that had been found. He constantly called the labs asking if they had results yet, how everything was progressing. But what remained from the girl's underwear was almost impossible to use. The issue was that these were hairs, most likely from a man's arm, that had fallen out naturally, meaning she hadn't torn them from him, so they had no roots. In cases like this, extracting DNA is extremely difficult, almost impossible. But technology had advanced so much that they managed to extract a full genetic profile from one of the 4 hairs. At least, they were able to create a usable sample. Only one specialized lab in the country was capable of handling such challenging cases. They uploaded the sample to CODIS, the National DNA Database, but found no matches. This meant the perpetrator had never been arrested and convicted. Their only remaining hope lay with public genealogy databases. That's when Tom decided to bring in C.C. Moore, a genetic genealogy specialist. She even has her own TV show. C.C. Moore searches public genealogy databases, where people upload their DNA out of curiosity, looking for criminals' relatives. She solved hundreds of cases by building family trees for perpetrators, then diving into social media to track where relatives moved, worked, and who they married. That's exactly what Moore did here. After studying massive amounts of information and building multiple family trees, she found a match. A couple with several children, including 3 sons. But there was a problem. This family lived in New Hampshire while the murder happened in Montana. That didn't faze C.C. Moore. She started searching for these sons on social media, looking for any Montana connections, photos, posts, anything. Bingo! The youngest son had written in his profile that on July 1st, 1996, he'd moved to Bozeman, Montana. Danielle was murdered that fall. On May 1st, 2024, the prime suspect finally had a name: Paul Nathaniel Hutchinson. He was 55 in 2024. He'd moved to Bozeman after military service at age 27 to attend Montana State University. When C.C. Moore identified him, he was married with 2 children, a boy and a girl. They'd been married 24 years. Doesn't sound like a brutal killer's profile, right? The man loved hunting and fishing, spent lots of time outdoors, and was described by friends as friendly and quiet. But here's the kicker. He knew Rochelle Shrewd very well. Remember her? Danielle's school friend. Hutchinson had taught Rochelle everything about fishing. She also loved the outdoors, hunting and fishing. They'd often go out fishing together, just the 2 of them in a boat. Rochelle couldn't believe he could have killed her friend years ago. She insisted that despite all their solo trips into the wilderness, she'd never felt uncomfortable or unsafe with him. He would never hurt anyone. So police knew whose DNA was found on Danielle's body. But to put him behind bars, they needed a fresh sample to compare with the evidence from the victim. This is usually done covertly, like grabbing a discarded coffee cup from a suspect. Trash isn't private property, so these samples are admissible in court. Nothing stopped police from simply tailing their suspect and snagging something from his garbage. But Tom Elfman wanted to talk to Hutchinson face to face. Maybe he'd slip up and reveal something. Plus, it would be pretty interesting to see how he'd react. On July 23rd, 2024, police went to Hutchinson's workplace. He was living about 100 miles from Bozeman in Dillon, Montana. They had to meet somewhere public so the suspect could leave if he wanted. They didn't have grounds to arrest him yet. But Hutchinson invited the officers into his office himself. We have the body cam footage. Pay attention to the man's body language. Good afternoon, Paul. Afternoon. I'm Tom Elfman from the Gallatin County Sheriff's Office. We wanted to talk with you. We're interviewing fishermen about what's been happening along riverbanks in southwest Montana. I see. Do you have a minute? Sure. In the office that Paul himself had invited the officers into, they showed him several photos of missing and murdered people. Among them was Danielle's picture. This is Danielle Houchins. She was found murdered by the Gallatin River in September 1996. You ever fished there? I've set nets on the Gallatin. Ever heard of Cameron Bridge fishing spot? Yeah. You been there? That's on Jackrabbit Lane, right? Yes. Maybe you saw her there, or someone who looked like her. I honestly don't even know. Maybe. I've been to 100 fishing spots one way or another. Could you have been there when she was killed? No. You didn't set nets there? No. Definitely not in September. What are you trying to ask? Are you getting at? I'm asking what you remember. What happened then? No, I don't remember anything. You want to ask me something else? No, that's enough for us. Paul was fidgeting, wringing his hands, scratching himself, biting his lips, trying to lean back and avoid looking at Danielle's photo at all costs. He kept as much distance as possible between himself and the table, and the officers. He was sweating like he was in a sauna, though it was genuinely hot that day. There was something unfinished in his responses. He seemed almost like he couldn't believe his luck, but at the same time was thinking, who dodged that bullet? But deep down, he knew he hadn't dodged anything. He understood that he was caught. He was probably shocked that the police let him go so easily, but that scared him even more. He realized they knew. After the interrogation, Hutchinson continued acting strangely. They put him under surveillance. Undercover officers watched him tearing down roads at breakneck speeds, making sudden U-turns, speeding up again, driving with no apparent destination or plan. He seemed to be thinking through his next move, trying to outrun his own terrifying thoughts. He knew he was caught, and he'd been afraid of this day his entire life. During the nearly 2-hour interview, Hutchinson showed extreme agitation. Investigators noted he was sweating profusely, scratching his face, and biting his hand. When shown Danielle's photo, Hutchinson visibly recoiled. It was clear he was uncomfortable. After his release, he behaved erratically, the sheriff's office reported. When Stephanie learned about this meeting, she was elated. Finally, justice would be served. She began imagining the long, painful trial ahead, having to look into Danielle's killer's eyes, telling everyone over and over what a wonderful person her sister was, reliving that grief all over again. But she only had 12 hours to think about it. Then she got a call from the sheriff's office. "He's dead. He killed himself," Detective Tom Elfman said over the phone. 12 hours after talking to police, Paul Hutchinson got in his car, drove to a remote location, and put a bullet in his head. Before doing so, he called 911 and told them where to find him, claiming an officer was in trouble, though he wasn't a police officer himself. DNA from Hutchinson's remains was compared to evidence from Danielle's case. Of course, the samples matched 100%. Paul Hutchinson was Danielle's killer. Danielle and Paul didn't know each other. That evening, Hutchinson was in the woods. He was working part-time as a forest ranger. There, he spotted the girl walking alone. He sexually assaulted Danielle and drowned her, holding her head underwater on the riverbank. He tried to hide her body, dragging it into the bushes. We can tell from the body's position, and because the girl's watch had slipped down her wrist. Afterward, Hutchinson went home and lived for years with complete impunity. Stephanie couldn't figure out how she felt about Paul's death. On one hand, it was a 100% admission of guilt. He couldn't last even a day. But on the other hand, he never spent an hour in prison. He lived a long, full life, while Danielle never even got to celebrate her 16th birthday. Stephanie still remembers her sister handling the items found in her pockets that tragic day. Scraps of paper, pebbles, and the driver's license Danielle was so proud of. The family scattered part of her ashes on nearby mountain slopes. Stephanie kept the rest for years, but after finding her sister's killer, she scattered them over the Gallatin River, where Danielle was found. While this man will never face a jury, I have no doubt he committed this brutal crime, Danielle's sister Stephanie Mallet said at a press conference. When it came time to answer for what he did, he chose to take his own life. He knew he was guilty, but couldn't face my family, his family, and the pain he caused us all. Did justice prevail? Everyone will have their own answer to that question.
Today we are considering the case of Henry McCabe. I first heard about this story in an interview with David Paulides, author of several books about missing persons cases. He mentioned how people can vanish at the most unexpected moments. For instance, they'll call a loved one, say something strange, and then the line goes dead.
Now, in this last book of mine called A Sobering Coincidence, I talk about a number of these disappearances where the person that disappeared is on the phone with somebody as they vanish. And what they say is completely bizarre. Sometimes they'll say, "Where are you? I need you here now." Boom, phone goes dead. They're found in a river, 3 miles away 30 days later.
He specifically cited the Henry McCabe case as an example. The audio recording of the voicemail Henry left for his wife is available online, and it's genuinely disturbing. Beyond the terrifying screams, there are sounds that seem almost impossible for a human to make. Let's dive into Henry McCabe's story. 32-year-old Henry McCabe, a Liberian immigrant working as a state auditor for Minnesota's Department of Revenue, lived in Mounds View with his wife Corinne and 2 daughters. Some sources suggest they had recently separated. This case has many unclear details. While his family was visiting California, Henry went clubbing on September 6th with 2 friends, William Kennedy and Kelvin Johnson. According to his friends, Henry drank heavily that night. They had to take away his wallet to stop his reckless spending and confiscated his house keys so he wouldn't lose them while intoxicated. When they left the club around 2 a.m. on September 7th, William Kennedy claims Henry asked to be dropped off at a gas station. Kennedy says he drove him to a Super America station in Fridley. This was strange. The gas station was in the opposite direction from Henry's home. Nevertheless, William claims he dropped Henry off there and left. 20 minutes later, at 2:23 a.m., Henry called his wife and left a deeply disturbing voicemail. 5 minutes later, at 2:28 a.m., Henry called his brother, though the contents of that conversation remain unknown. Some sources claim that during this same time frame, Corinne called Henry back. She allegedly heard him screaming that someone had shot him. However, reports about this phone call and the alleged shooting are inconsistent across different sources. Unfortunately, the complete voicemail recording was never publicly released. Only news clips are available on YouTube, but even these fragments are enough to understand that something terrible was happening.
It's a voicemail unlike anything you've ever heard before. There are 2 minutes worth of noises, bizarre ones, but very little actual talking. The tortured grunts suddenly stop. There is silence. Then someone, either Henry or another person, says, "Stop it."
Henry's cell phone went dead immediately after the call. The connection couldn't have simply dropped. When he made the call, he was right next to a cell tower in Creekview Park in New Brighton. Corrine called police, and an investigation began. Officers reviewed surveillance footage and questioned William Kennedy, who claimed he dropped Henry at the gas station. The surveillance cameras showed neither Henry nor William had been at that Super America station. William then changed his story, saying he'd made a mistake. He actually dropped his friend at a different gas station, a Holiday station 2 miles away. This turned out to be true, but why didn't he just drive Henry home? The search for Henry, or at least his body, continued for weeks. Family, friends, and volunteers combed through neighborhoods in Mounds View and Fridley. For almost a month, Henry McCabe was listed as missing. On November 2nd, a kayaker discovered Henry's body in Rush Lake in New Brighton, about 4 miles east of the Holiday gas station. This is where things got truly strange. Despite Corine's claims that Henry had been shot, there were no injuries on his body. None whatsoever. The Ramsey County medical examiner ruled the cause of death as drowning. Investigators didn't rule out suicide, as it emerged that Henry had been struggling with personal and work problems. He was behind on rent, had received a poor performance review at work, and his wife had moved to another city. However, one official theory suggests that since Henry was intoxicated that night, he may have accidentally stumbled upon the lake and drowned. But this doesn't explain the voicemail he left for his wife. Investigators in New Brighton and Mounds View stated the case would remain open until something could be determined. At a November 25th press conference, Henry's family asked investigators and the sheriff how they believed he died. They wanted to know at least how he ended up in the lake. No rivers or streams flow into it, and it was 2 miles from the gas station where his friend dropped him off. They said they might not be able to tell the family everything. "We're not trying to hide anything. We still want to know what happened," one investigator stated. Police called this case unique, and indeed, law enforcement may be concealing something, if only because they edited the audio recording and released only a shortened version to the media.
The growls turned to high-pitched moans.
Like he's moaning in pain?
Like moaning in pain.
I try to picture where he was, what it might have been like, what circumstances would have made him sound like that.
Henry's colleagues and friends described him as a true gentleman who was always willing to share anything with friends. He wanted to succeed in his career, according to coworkers. Nobody believes he would have wandered to a lake while intoxicated and voluntarily taken his own life. What theories exist about Henry McCabe's case? We've already covered two: murder and accidental or intentional drowning. There's another theory linking Henry's case to the Smiley Face Killers. This alleged gang is credited with over 40 murders across different U.S. states. They supposedly left smiley face graffiti at crime scenes, and victims' bodies were found in bodies of water miles from where they were last seen alive. They reportedly targeted people who were either already intoxicated or whom they would get drunk. However, one detail doesn't match. That gang killed white victims, while Henry was an immigrant from Liberia.
Apparently, the feeling of law enforcement is that it's just, quote-unquote, a standard freshwater drowning, nothing unusual, other than the tape. And if you go back to what I've chronicled in the past, that there have been several times where people have disappeared being on the phone, and it's as though they're seeing something that scares them to death, or something else is happening, but there are these conversations that end suddenly and the person's gone.
Let's talk about this story. What did you hear on this recording? It will be very interesting for me to read your thoughts on this. Please like it if you are interested in this topic, and don't forget to subscribe.